समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है, अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
Two tumultuous 19-month periods have defined our past over 3 generations, determined our present, and will continue to dominate the future in their very contrasting ways. One is easy to guess: the 19 months of the emergency between 25th June 1975 and 18th January 1977, when the elections were declared. Serendipity that this column is being written on 21st March, the day that marks the 48th anniversary of the official revocation of the emergency. One set of the 19 history-defining months out of the way. Can you guess what would be the second? I can make it easier for you. Go back to the tenures of our prime ministers. Not Nehru, not Indira Gandhi, not Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Narendra Modi, VP Singh, Devagowda, Gujral, Charan Singh. None of these. I made it easier for you. Since I have already given the riddle away, I will now suggest that we read the just released biography of Lal Bahadur Shastri, written by eminent former IAS officer turned scholar Sanjeev Chopra. I had the great honor to be among those speaking at the release of the book, The Great Conciliator, Lal Bahadur Shastri and the Transformation of India, at the National Capital's India International Center this Tuesday, just this last Tuesday. Between 9th June 1964, after Jawaharlal Nehru's death, and his own tragic passing at Tashkent on 11 January 1966, Shastri also served for exactly 19 months. And why do we argue that those were as consequential for India's political evolution as the emergency? If in entirely contrasting ways, let's talk more about this. Think of a mere 19 months when India fought a full-fledged war, September 1965, a localized skirmish with tanks, Kutch, April-July 1965, dealt with crippling food shortages, a difficult political transformation, and built more institutions than in any comparable period in our history. In fact, also unleashed the Green Revolution. The high point of the 19th Shastri months was, of course, the 22-day war that he fought against great odds and won in principle, even if military historians often call it a stalemate. A stalemate against a much better equipped enemy with initiative, besides equipment in each dimension of warfare that was at least 3 notches superior, is in fact a victory. Plus, only one side, Pakistan, had an objective in that war. They saw a great opportunity to conquer Kashmir, but they lost. It was the last time they had the relative strength militarily and diplomatically to take Kashmir. That story is over. Shastri's resolve buried that dream forever. The legacy of Shastri is unfairly overshadowed by the peace he made at Tashkent and a visit that also took his life. His true contribution is the war he waged. Field Marshal Ayub Khan and his sidekick Zulfikar Ali Bhutto saw great vulnerabilities in the Indian armed forces, reeling under the 1962 debacle and now caught in a frenetic transition and expansion. They were emboldened by the 1963 Hazratbal crisis in Srinagar. They misread the political transition from Nehru to Shastri as political instability, and then they checked out India's preparedness and morale with probing raids in the run of Kutch, what we'd call ROK, going ahead. As Sanjeev Chopra tells us in this very well documented account, the Pakistanis also checked out their American masters' response by using the pattern tanks in ROK, Run of Kutch. Under their larger agreement, they were not allowed to use them against India, only against communist states. But because the Americans did nothing more than make some usual pious toot-toot noises. They knew they could make the big move on Kashmir. The result, just a couple of months later, was Operation Gibraltar, which involved sending more than 10,000 armed infiltrators into Kashmir. It was named Gibraltar because that was the first foothold the Islamic conquerors established in Europe. Each infiltrating group was also named after a famed Islamic warrior, Tariq, Qasim, Khalid, Salahuddin, and for sure a Ghaznavi group. Once these groups pulverized the Indian forces in the valley, the decisive blow would be Operation Grand Slam, as Ayub named the planned massive tank thrust to take Akhnur in the Jammu sector and cutting off the valley and large parts of Kashmir from the Indian mainland. Go for the jugular, he called it. He is also recorded as having boasted that it is well known that the Hindu morale cannot survive more than one or two hard blows. In fact, feeding into this delusion was also the jingoistic coverage of the Kutch skirmishes in the Pakistani media. That coverage mostly had Indian army fleeing breathlessly, running away breathlessly, and the Pakistani army chasing them relentlessly. That is something that also Sanjeev Chopra's book records, and that is how mythologies feed into delusion. In this case, there was also a misreading of the resolve of the leader on the other side. Generals, particularly Pakistani generals, always have a low opinion of civilians. In this case, given how the thought processes of Ayub and his cohort worked, Shastri's diminutive stature and soft-spoken style strengthened this delusion. Except that inside that 5 foot 2 inch frame, frail 5 foot 2 inch frame, resided an incredibly strong-willed Indian patriot. The increasingly successful fight back against the infiltrator was still on when Shastri convened his cabinet and got some basics sorted out in terms of the approach. And then on September 3, with Pakistani tanks under Operation Grand Slam threatening Akhnur, he also had another cabinet meeting where broad contours of Indian response were drawn. Significantly, first it said that Pakistanis have to be dissuaded from believing that they can ever get Kashmir by force or can change India's borders or borderline between them and India by force. Second, very significant, it included destroying Pakistan's offensive power, Pakistan's offensive military power. And third, it's very significant, only capturing the minimum Pakistani territory necessary and returning it after successful completion of the war. So there was no intention to keep any territory. I'm underlining this point because there is a belief that India should have kept the territory it captured. That was never the idea, that was never the intention of Shastri's cabinet. There is much unanimity in India on the outcome of the war. We won it. That's the belief, of course. In India, the sore point will also be the return of the Hajipir Pass in the Udi sector. Many people say India returned its Golan Heights to Pakistan. The UN ceasefire resolution, however, had demanded that both sides return to the ceasefire line as it existed on 5th of August 1965, which means the Pakistanis also had to vacate Cham. Pakistan had lost its last chance to grab Kashmir, but the territorial and tactical picture on the ground was not as one-sided as believed in the Indian folklore. That's what caused the Hajipir compromise or exchange and probably Shastri his life at such a young age. From whispers in 1966 to WhatsApp in present times, Shastri's death has been one of those eternal mysteries and the subject of countless conspiracy theories. Who got Shastri killed? This book gives us clarity on two things. One, that Shastri had already had 2 heart attacks, one in 1959 at a very young age, and then on 5th June 1964, days before taking over as Prime Minister. This was the era before statins, stents, bypass surgeries. A 3rd heart attack would be that much tougher to survive. And the second fact, that on the day he signed the Tashkent agreement, Shastri was initially cheerful. But as he heard of reactions back home, the media coverage, the surrender of Hajipir having become the refrain in the press, And finally, when he spoke with his daughter and wife, both of whom seemed unhappy, his spirit dropped. It was in that mood that he went to sleep. Within hours, he was gone. In fact, I can't let you go without telling you a tiny story on the sidelines of the Tashkent agreement and then Lal Bahadur Shastri's tragic death there. So, this is from a book written by Pakistani scholar Dr. Farooq Bajwa, and the book is titled From Kutch to Tashkent. And Dr. Farooq Bajwa, in his book, recounts an incident that he vouches for, where he says that Pakistan's foreign secretary then, quite a clever fellow, Machiavellian, or maybe more evil than that, Aziz Ahmad, he comes to Bhutto. He knocks at Bhutto's door late in the night in Tashkent, and as Bhutto opens the door, he says, "The bastard is dead." And Bhutto asks, "Which one?" What this also tells us is that within the Pakistani camp, there was a great deal of tension because Bhutto also thought that Ayub had made too much of a compromise, because Bhutto it is who had driven Ayub into that war. And that set off a spiral that ultimately led to the 1971 war and the breakup of Pakistan. It is ironic and also quite tragic and unfair that while talking about Shastri's legacy, we get bogged down with that war and peace, or in the overwhelming Jai Jawan story. His even more long lasting contribution was on the Jai Kisan front. He initiated the Green Revolution, found C. Subramaniam as his food minister, what would be called agriculture minister now, talent hunted scientist Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, and founded India's first central agricultural universities. Most importantly, he reached out to the Americans for collaboration. One of the lesser appreciated sides to Shastri's politics is that he wasn't a man of the Nehruvian center left. You could call him a man of the center, as Chopra does. I would say instead that he was more like a leader of the center, but leaning significantly to the right. For evidence, read about his dismay at Nehru blocking Purushottam Das Tandon's election as Congress chief, Shastri's upbringing at Servants of People Society, and learnings from Lala Lajpat Rai, and then the backing by decidedly right-wing and pro-West Swatantra Party over his first no confidence motion. Also, check out his speech where he locked horns with his communist antagonist, Professor Hiran Mukherjee, over his accusation that he was deviating from Nehruvianism. In essence, he said, deviation is what you complain about in communist systems. In democracy, there is change. And then he went on to say in that great, phenomenal speech how Stalin deviated from Lenin and how Khrushchev then moved on from Stalin, dumping whatever Stalin was doing. That's how he countered the left, and that in a way positioned him on the center right. Probably that's the reason Congress doesn't celebrate him quite as much as you would expect them to, and the BJP and RSS like him to that extent. There is one enduring Americanism I repeat often. What is that Americanism? The only legacy you leave behind is people. In case of Shastri, I will rephrase that. An even better legacy for a great public figure to leave behind is the institutions they built. Next time you hear the word PMO, Prime Minister's Office, CBI, CVC, Agricultural Prices Commission, even the BSF, Border Security Force, think Lal Bahadur Shastri. It is all of these institutions, besides that war and peace, that make his 19 months even more consequential for our present and future than the emergency.